Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special virtual discussion on caregiving as part of this year's Chronic Disease Day slate of events. Thank you to Good Days and the Chronic Disease Alliance for having us. I'm Danelle LeBlanc, and I am joined today by Dr. Roxana Delgado with UT Health San Antonio, as well as Sheikha Alothman, the founder of Oracle Connect. And I'm so happy that you guys are here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, yes, for having us.
Absolutely.
By the way, please call me Roxana.
Oh, Roxana, yes, okay, thank you. Can you tell, so I've had the opportunity to get to know both of you and just been amazed by the work that you do, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself for our audience and why you're so dedicated to advocating for and supporting the informal or family caregivers who help family and friends facing chronic or rare illnesses? And Sheikha, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I found this space by coincidence about 4 years ago, 2018. And I was in public health for 12 years, maybe counting on 13 now. And I came across this problem by coincidence. So one fun fact is a lot of maybe marketers talk to me about my startup and my work, and they're like, oh, say you're a caregiver. That's how you found out about the problem. But no, in reality, I came across it in a conference. And to me, it's a very interesting problem. And it's a very human problem. And it's a very unfair situation, to be honest. And I'm going to talk more about that, like where the value of the caregivers exists in the healthcare system. And that's how I came across it. It was just by this conference that I was at. And I ended up speaking with different people and taking it to different organizations, ended up here at MIT in Boston. And I found some reciprocation of concern and interest of pursuing this further. And that's how I ended up working on it. I know it sounds boring, but trust me, once I talk more, I hope you're going to get that. There's a lot more interesting aspects to it.
Absolutely. It's the human experience. And that's one thing I love about both of your work is your willingness and intent to learn about directly from the people who are being impacted. And so for you, Roxana, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so dedicated in advocating and supporting family caregivers?
I'm an assistant professor at the School of Medicine at UT Health, and most of the work that I focus on is with, the caregivers and veterans with catastrophic wounds. So what we call the wounded, ill, and injured veterans, but a lot of very strong focus on their families. And it wasn't by coincidence. In 2009, my husband is a combat wounded veteran. He was wounded in Iraq. He sustained catastrophic injuries that required 3 years of full-time caregiving. And, being immersed in that community, getting to understand and see their challenges and the day in and day out, and being one by myself 13 years ago, gave me a different perspective. And that's when I knew that I could just, I needed to do something about it. So I truly shifted my entire career in that sense. My area of study at that time was mostly brain injury, PTSD, and some other injuries in veterans. But I decided at that time I really wanted to work with the family members, specifically the caregivers, and looking at their health and well-being.
There is an amazing synergy with the two of you in that you both have led implementation of programs that help better integrate family caregivers into the healthcare system, which is such a rare thing. And so I was just thrilled to have both of you here to talk about that. We understand how critical it is to the health of our healthcare system that we invest in family caregiving taking place behind the scenes of clinical settings. So Dr. Roxana, can you share some background and describe your work with inclusive care?
So absolutely. Inclusive care, it's and what we call the Campaign for Inclusive Care is a collaborative between the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, the Veterans Affairs of the VA, and graciously funded by USAA. So it is an endeavor that started in 2018, looking at how can we best incorporate caregivers into the treatment plan of the veteran, or how, we all know in the literature that when you have a committed caregiver that is the best advocate for the patient, they tend to do better. There's better health outcomes. There's better ways to for them to follow up with their care. So my role with the inclusive care is basically evaluating the program and being on top of it in terms of with our team to look at what are those unique characteristics that we can enhance and elevate to make sure that caregivers are incorporated and better equipped, right, to be part of the medical team. And that's basically what we've been doing for 4 years. First of all, with the inclusive care, it's a new model. So we know that when there's new approaches, we need to do an exhaustive literature reviews and systematic reviews of what is out there. So we started with that in 2018. And right now, 4 years later, the VA has implemented inclusive care across the nation, and we are evaluating the process, the implementation, and how it's being practiced in the different facilities. So it's been a fascinating multi-phase project, and definitely something that has brought a lot of fulfillment, because as a caregiver myself 13 years ago, there was no greater joy than walking into a medical room or with the medical team and them looking at me and saying, "Hey, Roxana, how can we best help your husband?" Or if there's any new treatment plan, which is still happens sometimes, it's like, are you equipped? Do you have the things at home? Are you do you have the resources to really being able to commit, right, to the treatment plan? So those are very critical questions that we need to start and continue to engage family caregivers into the care of the patient. So in this case with veterans.
Wow. Okay, you guys, are you hearing this? How amazing it would be to walk in and have someone ask us as family caregivers what resources we need. Oh my goodness. So I did check out your website, the website Campaign for Inclusive Care. And there's a number of different kinds of experts ranging from clinical education, combat medicine, mental health and illness, and your areas of expertise, which are epidemiology, military and veteran health, and caregiving. What can we expect? What can a family caregiver expect when we sign up and connect with you or one of the other experts participating in the Campaign for Inclusive Care?
So you see, this is one of the beauties. You're looking at the Campaign for Inclusive Care website, and you see that this is not a one field of study endeavor. This is a multidisciplinary team. We all work together. So what to expect when you, if you are a caregiver and you want to reach out to any of us, we'll definitely be able to address any of the questions that the caregiver may have. But we highly and strongly encourage, if you're an administrator at a hospital or if you work in a healthcare setting, specifically also healthcare providers, to really take on that next step. We have what is called the Academy for Inclusive Care, where it's a 4-module training program. It's very easy, it's only an hour, but it kind of explains a little bit more about inclusive care, how to practice it, how to better equip yourself as a healthcare provider to really serve the community you are working with. So we encourage anyone to really reach out to any of us. The website is from the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. So definitely some of the requests, maybe one of the experts may not be able to fulfill it right away, but the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is equipped and is connected, and it's eager to hear from the nation in terms of getting to know more about the inclusive care. So any of us could definitely share, some more information and even send it to the people who can actually address any of the concerns or questions.
Okay, so I want to emphasize what you said. If you're an administrator a healthcare provider, a professional, then there's an opportunity to enroll in a 1-hour course called the Academy for Inclusive Care. Is that
Inclusive care.
correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Fantastic. Okay, so now you guys, we're going to pivot to Shake Up, because you're gonna hear about this innovative way that you found to pair family caregivers with professional caregivers. And it was implemented in December of 2018 at a hospital in New York. What inspired you to utilize what you describe as the overlooked resource of family caregivers in this project?
I'm getting goosebumps. I love your question. I love what Roxana just said. I'm going to ask for an offline tea party for the three of us later on, maybe. We will have a lot things to discuss. Thank you for the question. I can talk for hours about this, but I'm going to keep it as short as possible for the sake of time. So the inspiration of what we did was, there was an app called Waze, W-A-Z-E, nothing to do with healthcare. It was acquired by Google Maps later on. And it was an app that used people's feedback on the road, drivers on the road, or passengers on the road, to actually inform other drivers later on after them and on the road about a bump, or like there's a police car, there's a camera. And so we took that as a sample, and we said, why don't we implement that for family caregivers, where someone who's gone through the journey, gone through the road, has seen some stuff. Why don't we, say, hey, by the way, three years in with dementia, you might want to look into this, or you might want to look into placement, or you might want to talk to this or that person. So that was the genesis of it. And I just want to emphasize, the reason why I mentioned this is because we looked, and this has been a passion for me, to look outside of healthcare. What is going on outside of healthcare? The standards of innovation outside of healthcare, in transportation and entertainment, healthcare needs to catch up. And so that's why I was very happy to receive feedback from this. And I saw that there was a hospital that was interested in implementing it. Now, I was not part of the implementation team. It was internally implemented. But later on, I also had an experience of trying to implement it through, again, a National Science Foundation program with MIT here in Boston. And what I learned, and that is a question that is still pending for me, is that family caregivers do learn from each other. So yes, we talk about professionals, we talk about clinicians. Yes, everybody provides value. But one of the most reliable sources from the perspective of a family caregiver is another family caregiver. There's empathy, you understand that the person has gone in their shoes, and there's no BS. I hope it's okay to say that word. But there's no playing around or beating around the bush. They really say it as they are, because they got nothing to lose if you think about it. You're a family member of someone who has the condition. And the question that I was speaking with a colleague of mine a couple of days ago, and the question of, yes, we know the family caregivers provide value of care, right? There's a big number of like whatever $1 billion per year of value of care provided. The question that I have, and I searched in the research and I couldn't find anything about that, was, what is the value of shared information? What is the value of that support that family caregivers provide with each other? We need to stop and acknowledge that. This is happening today everywhere. Again, behind closed doors, and in very private, protected support groups and networks. Sure, we have to respect their privacy, but we can't. It's not an excuse to neglect that they are a playing factor. And like you mentioned, Danelle, a lot of family caregivers, because of how unfair they see the journey is, they turn to advocates. That is work. That is, yes, it comes from passion, but that is work. That is value as well. And so, again, what we did was, like you mentioned, was match family caregivers who are of similar profiles so that we can maximize that sharing of information. But I think what I learned most is that this is still an overlooked resource. Yes, family caregivers, not only are they overlooked, to be fair or unfair, but they actually do have knowledge. They have knowledge that is valuable, and yes, overlooked. Thank you for emphasizing that word. They're overlooked.
Yes, indeed. And you mentioned that how much we learn from one another, and the value of that, because we can be honest with one another in a way that sometimes we feel we don't have permission to be in a healthcare setting, or a healthcare provider may not feel they can be fully honest with us. And so I think that's part of what adds to the value of this type of work. So one of the many concerns for both hospital administrators and patients is the cost of care. And we need to do more to reduce unsustainable costs in the US health system. One of the many benefits of this system you introduced is that it's something we can do at a negligible cost. What is the role of support groups in the family caregiving space, and how do you see it evolving? What's the connection there?
Thank you for that amazing question. As if I didn't slip it to you. but but
we're gonna pretend. Yeah, we're gonna pretend that didn't happen, y'all.
But no, thank you for highlighting that. That is really important. I really think so. The reason why the hospital in New York was so invested, we immediately got a reaction of like, let's make it happen. And I was just astounded. How could this happen? And the reason why it happened is because if you think about it, just like you mentioned, the cost of including a family, yes, of course it's important, but the cost of supporting a family caregiver, in addition to the patient that has been released, that has been discharged, is enormous. And yes, we have social workers, we have case managers who are doing their best. They're fantastic people. It's just the system is heavy. And so if you think from the perspective of the administration of a hospital or a clinic, to say that family caregivers can support each other, can carry each other, is a huge weight off their shoulders. So again, I think if we're going to send a message to any administrators of any institutes that are listening to this, I do encourage that administrations look into the value of, again, shared knowledge that family caregivers provide. I know support groups are available everywhere. Sometimes they're independently organized. Sometimes it's by the Alzheimer's Association. Sometimes it's by the hospital itself. But I think more should be done. We should look into the dynamics of these interactions and support groups in a different light. And I'm going to mention the second part of the question of how do they evolve. Think about what's happening now on TikTok, on Instagram. And this is something that I've seen in my course of in my journey of research and implementation since 2018. In the pandemic, I have seen what they call micro-influencers on social networks, people who are influencers, but in a specific niche. And so these are people who have dementia in their lives, and they're exposed, they're vulnerably, they're putting their fathers, their lives, their house, they're putting their experience out there. And the following these micro-influencers are having is insane. And you can read the messages now. You can go on and you can see, thank you for telling me about this. I didn't know about this. So the question is, how do you integrate social networks and social media, not essentially in the same format like on TikTok and Instagram, but we have to stop and acknowledge that this is value that the healthcare system is not providing. This is outside of the healthcare system technically. And so all of these elements coming together, nobody has the answer, of course, but that is definitely worth investing into and testing into and looking into. That, again, that resource that the family caregivers have, that exchange of information is happening today, but it's booming out of necessity, and very few, in my opinion, people are actually looking to facilitate that, to help that happen more organized in a more organized fashion, or to support it. I think there's a big role to be played there that is to be filled.
Absolutely. And, ideally, it shouldn't be something that we just stumble across because we happen to be on social media and discover it, rather than something that is introduced at the time of greatest need as a resource. What did you learn about what worked and what didn't work that can be considered for implementation in other hospitals or formal healthcare settings?
Thank you for the question again. One of the other things that I also noticed is the rise of consultations that people are at least in the dementia space, I can speak of the dementia space, but it's replicable. It does happen everywhere with all conditions. What's happening now is that there's a lot of people who are getting certifications of how to deal with dementia, as an example. And some of these people have a history of 20, 30, 40 years in the space, and they've worked in facilities and they've seen hundreds of cases of dementia. So they do have actual substance. Some people don't. Some people just go and get a certification, which is easy to get, unfortunately, and to just promote their services. So what's happening right now is that there's no way for the family caregiver to actually vet and verify who is useful for me, who would know. I'm going to talk about, for example, and I think Roxana, you mentioned the culture, like cultural appropriation of interventions. There's no way for me now to look for, okay, I have a friend, for example, whose mother speaks Marathi, a different language, a specific language. And there's a consultant or a social worker who actually knows dementia and knows that language. But then how do you match that, right? And why is that a difficult question for us to answer? We have the technology, we just have to have the right channels implemented. So what I learned is there's a lot of players, there's no shortage of information or people willing to help in whatever format, private or institutionalized or individualized. It's a matter of again, keeping an open eye on what's out there, especially with the changes that happened with the pandemic, which are positive in bringing people virtual and bringing people together. It's just a matter of connecting the right answers with the right questions.
Connecting the right answers with the right questions. And I think a lot of that is reflected in the inclusive care model. Mm-hmm. Roxana, so, putting all these ideas together and the evolution is really exciting. So thank you both so much for your work in moving that forward. I do also want to talk about a very important topic, which is caregiver burnout. Because it is, we've all been impacted in one way or another. And, Roxana, you were really ahead of the curve in conducting some of the first known research to help predict and prevent suicide ideation in veteran caregivers. Can you please tell us about your research on these predictors, and to what extent does it apply to civilian caregivers as well?
Thank you so much for that question. If I may add something about what Shaika was already talking about, the support groups, they're so important. I want to just echo and emphasize what she was just saying. And especially when you're working also, when you think about the veteran community, most veterans will be cared for more than 3, 4, 5 conditions. And actually, our study shows that on average, each veteran caregiver was caring for 5 different conditions. So PTSD, brain injury, you have chronic pain, many times amputations, burn. So when you find yourself caring for multiple conditions, and that each one of them is going to be associated with so many other, comorbidities, it gets incredibly challenging. So being in a support group, being connected virtually with other caregivers across the nation gives you the power to understand better, to be more equipped, to really reach out to the resources that you need that are not necessarily in your own cities or regions. So definitely support groups are an incredible way of finding and reaching out what you need. So our work, but actually was born out of that. We know that veteran caregivers, they care for multiple conditions. It's incredibly challenging. Those caregivers who are caring for veterans that are younger from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're younger. So they're in the prime of their time. Many of them were in school. They have children, small children. And then you face this incredible challenge of having to care for someone that needs your attention. So we started noticing in the literature, the RAND Corporation, they actually did a population study back in 2014 that showed how caregivers of veterans had a higher rate of anxiety and depression and all these different health-related outcomes that are more on the negative side. So in 2017, we started working on having a study when it looks at looking at the health and well-being of caregivers. And we were brave enough, and I don't mean it in a, but we were discouraged, let's say it that way, to not include questions about suicidal ideation. And as a team, we all came together. Our team is amazing. We're all related to veterans. And we came together and we said, you know what? We are not going to listen. We will ask the question. We are not asking is not gonna change the circumstances. So we didn't want to ask the questions just for the sake of asking a question. We wanted to know a bit more. So our study not only shows the prevalence of suicidal ideation in a sample of almost 500 caregivers of veterans, wounded, ill, and injured veterans, but we also look at some of the predictors. So our data was basically provides information on what are those predictors in 3 main groups, which are low, medium, and high risk for suicidal ideation, and how those predictors contribute to the thoughts or the tendencies of feeling despair and perhaps thinking about suicide. How could this translate to the civilian? I honestly don't think caregiving is a one size fits all, and I don't think being a caregiver should be sliced between being a veteran or being, caring for a civilian. I think that one commonality between all of us is that we're full of love. We do it because we were called basically to really care for a loved one. We love the person we're caring for, but we all go through the different levels, but we all go through the challenges of navigating the healthcare system, of understanding how to best care for our loved one, and how best to move forward. So I think that how could this be translatable is that our study shows some of the factors that contribute to suicidal ideation, and some of them are depression and the loss of self, like loss of identity, and how many times caregivers, no matter the disease, they have to step aside from their careers and they have to put on hold their life to care for a loved one. So these predictors are not unique, I would say, to just veteran caregivers, but I think it could, transcend to the civilian caregivers. And there's so much more that needs to be done. This is seminal work. It's like you said, Danielle is the first one in the veteran caregiver community. So we would love to see more coming out. There's very few studies looking at suicidal ideation and suicide attempts across the caregiver community. So we would like to see more, not just to know more, but to really implement programs that would help reduce those thoughts. So
thank you so much for being brave enough to ask the question.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Not asking is not going to change the circumstances. We need to know. We need to
Exactly.
know.
Exactly. Because the whole point is to be able to help, then to follow up and do something about it. So I think we probably already touched on the potential answer to this question, Roxana, but what have you found are the most effective kinds of interventional support to connect veteran caregivers to help? Chika, if you chime in on this as well, what are the most effective kinds of interventional support for caregivers?
I would say it's having a very well-grounded support system in terms of organizations that are out there that are helping. I can speak about, for example, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation will be that organization for veteran caregivers. They have extensive list of resources, so getting connected with them would definitely point you in the right direction in where to go and how to find resources.
Wonderful.
I would say it's a hybrid between what the social worker knows in the case management and the counselor for benefits to know how to navigate the healthcare system and the benefits, and as well as the family caregivers themselves. So it's a hybrid between that kind of expertise that comes from experience in the workplace, but also I would dare to call it expertise as well in caregiving, that kind of expertise that comes from other family caregivers. So it's a hybrid of that. And then of course, the most important thing is to catch the family caregiver sometime before they even know that they're a family caregiver, like early on, before there's a burden or before they hit the mark of, hey, I have a problem, before that bomb goes off.
Yes.
So I think that's the answer to that question.
Oh my goodness. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your work and being brave enough to ask the questions that nobody often seems to want to hear the answers to. Because we need someone to ask those hard questions in order to connect us to the resources and support that we need. So thank you again. Stay tuned for our next segment in just a few moments with Mike Porath, founder and CEO of The Mighty, on his personal experiences as a caregiver. Well, hello, everyone. Once again, I'm now joined by Mike Porath, CEO of The Mighty. Mike, welcome to Caregiving in America. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So for anyone who may not have yet heard about The Mighty, can you tell us what it is and who it's for?
Sure. The Mighty is the leading health community online. We've got about 3.5 million members who share experiences with each other around any type of health issue they're either facing themselves or caring for others. We also have healthcare professionals on the platform as well. And so it's a place that is a safe and supportive space where they can find others that are going through similar situations as themselves, and just really trying to navigate all the issues that come up with health, whether it's the emotional side. They can talk more about the specifics. We do have a lot of caregivers that are trying to get tips and better. They ask questions of others on how they've handled different situations and things like that. But it's really a place for folks to come together and have open, honest relationships about all they're going through with their healthcare journeys.
Yeah, it's kind of like a social media platform specific to dealing with and talking about these types of health issues. And I'm wondering what motivated you to build it?
Yeah, so my background, I was actually, I was a journalist. I worked at ABC News, NBC News, and the New York Times, and I was, focused more on the digital media side. So that was kind of the experience that I brought in. And then my wife and I had our first of 4 kids. And my daughter was born with a rare disease, and it took us a couple years to actually get a diagnosis. She's autistic and has all kinds of different challenges physically, developmentally, cognitively. And it was going through that process of trying to figure out all the ways that we could, help her. And what I recognized over time was the single best source for us were other caregivers. They were other parents that were, had children with the same rare disease. And, they really became mentors, for us accidentally. It was just, we had a great team of doctors that we work with, but on a day-to-day basis, it was the other parents really that were, dealing with so many of the same types of issues that we were. So once I kind of stumbled on that, and I really learned a lot about community through the community that we became involved in around my daughter's rare disease, which is called Dup15q syndrome. And so that's where it just struck me that in the rise of these other social networks, you have, most networks are based around friends or family or professional relationships. And it was a network of complete strangers that were all going through the same thing together that was the most impactful for me. And it just seemed like this thing should exist, that a lot of other people dealing with any other types of health issues would benefit from this. So then it was, talking with lots of different folks about trying to figure out how to build it and all of that, and just bootstrapping it. I think I talked enough about it with my wife that she eventually was like, all right, are we going to do this or not? And that was kind of the kick in the butt that I needed. And then so we bootstrapped it about 7 years ago, and it's now, really grown and flourished. And we've actually got research now that's showing that it really does help people. It does improve health outcomes by actually, finding peers to talk to about what you're going through.
Wow. Yeah, that day-to-day support behind the scenes is absolutely essential. And I think it's fascinating that you've actually, probably partly due to your past experience, also able to capture the data around the impact of that for the people who join. So
Yep.
you've stated that an intent to make the Mighty the most powerful community in health. Tell us about the kind of powerful you mean.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's very personal. It's just I recognized how much value I got out of building relationships and having conversations with people that were in a similar boat as I was, right, in terms of being a parent of a daughter with this rare disease and all that comes with it. And just I want to spread that value everywhere else. I recognize the value of those shared experiences, and I want to help others kind of achieve what I have, which is just getting a lot more help. And then what's interesting is a lot of the people that receive help end up becoming the ones who then offer help right, to others. Everyone becomes more of an expert in what they're kind of going through. And so we started actually with stories, just personal stories written by people in the community that were just open and honest and vulnerable about what they're going through. And we now have over 50,000 of those stories published across over 1,000 different health conditions. And that's really what that brings people into the Mighty. We actually don't do any paid marketing. It all happens by producing these great stories that the community members provide, and helping them articulate their own experiences, and then pushing those out into the world. And people find us through those stories being shared on Facebook, or Googling health conditions and seeing the stories pop up there. And that's really what's helped build the community. So it started with stories, and then I feel like stories are a great way to begin conversations, right? And it's and so that part of it has worked really well in terms of starting with these honest stories that people from the community provide, and then moving into the conversations. And you're right about the data side, which was we weren't not thinking about this as we were building it, but the millions and millions of conversations on the platform and the stories and all of that have allowed us to help companies and the healthcare industry. Really, we're trying to amplify the patient voice and make them better understand what are people actually going through, what are they dealing with, what are the things that really matter to them. And so we have more and more companies working with us to kind of better capture that type of insight, which is what we work with a number of partners to help provide those.
Okay, so I love that. So the power is the power of shared experiences, shared stories, and the power of patient voices and caregiver voices.
Yep.
And one of the reasons that the Mighty does stand out is the diversity, as you were talking about, the diversity of stories written for and by people facing chronic or rare illness and their caregivers. And there were so many that stood out for me, including one that was titled How to Deal with the Uncertainty of Being Chronically Ill. And although it wasn't specific to caregiving, there's a shared experience of uncertainty for care partners. And the author wrote about the importance of having a creative outlet and said, she wrote, it's amazing to realize that pain and fear can be transformed when woven into a beautiful or moving creation. And that really resonated because having a chronic or rare condition or being a caregiver isn't alone what makes us exceptional, but it does create a typically unwanted opportunity through the process and practice of courage, of transforming that fear, that uncertainty and pain into something valuable, beautiful, or helpful in some way, which is kind of like what the mighty is, right?
Yeah.
So there's certainly too many to count, but what's one of the stories what's one of the stories you've read from the mighty community that's stayed with you?
Yeah, there are a number. I mean, what I love about the example you brought up is that's why we called this the mighty versus patients or caregivers, or we didn't want a literal, name for it. We wanted it to be aspirational, right? And I think that the story that you picked up on that resonated so much with you is that, constructive approach and finding courage and strength and joy and all of these things in something that's really difficult and really challenging, and I think that's why we frankly named the website, the app, our email, like the company, the mighty, is because we want that feeling that clearly that writer and that story, captured. For me, I'd say probably the most impactful was a story written by a man named Kerry Magro, who's written over 100 stories on our platform. He is a young man living with autism, and I, fortunately been able to meet him in person now. But one of the stories that he wrote early on was he's verbal now, but he was nonverbal as a child, and he wrote a story. I forget the exact title, but it was essentially about the letter that he would write to his parents, or what he would have said if he were verbal back when he was 5 or 6 years old. And it was really this letter of love about how much he appreciated and how much they meant to him, all of the work that they were putting in, and that how much it would pay off in the long run, and he now is someone who he's actually one of the consultants on a Netflix show around autism, and he's written books. He started his own nonprofit. He's got a PhD. He's done these amazing things. And as someone who's, I have a daughter with autism, and it's challenging. Right now I'm actually living in Atlanta with her so she can take part in an autism program here while my wife and 3 boys are back in Los Angeles. So I'm very much in the caregiving role right now. But that story to me has been such a great motivating force. It's helped me, it's that I think about it, when I'm the last 15, 20 minutes of the day, when I'm reading her books in her bed, or, things like that, is just, it's hard to know how this pays off, all the effort, everything that's going into it, but you just believe that it's working, right? And that was a story for me that is just, I've thought about it hundreds and hundreds of times over the years in different moments where I needed that extra little motivation to do some extra work. So, but that's one that's meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. It is so hard to know sometimes, and that whether or not it's going to pay off, but it's kind of like, planting seeds, right? You put them in the ground and you water them, you make sure they get plenty of sunlight, you weed them, and you don't really, it takes a while for you to see the sprouts.
Yeah.
But you believe and you hope and you pray that that care and that love is going to pay off in some form.
Yeah.
I love that. You're known as being a trusted source of healthcare information in general, as well as being a trusted source for underrepresented populations. How did you achieve that? And what can other organizations learn from your success?
I think for us, we started by most of our staff, we have about 50 people, at the company full time. Most of them have health issues. Many are caregivers for people who have health issues. And I think it really starts from that, because the team, like, we've all kind of embraced this. It's one of the reasons why people join the company, because they feel like this is, they believe in the mission. It really resonates with them. And I think for, when you're looking at, diversity, you can look at diversity in all kinds of different ways. One of them that often gets left out is with people with disabilities, right? And I think that if you were to look at, not that everyone wants to put up all of their disabilities and all that, but our company is, I think we've done a really good job of hiring people that very much are part of this community. Many of them were community members before they were employees. And so just that notion of we should be a community by the people, for the people, was really important from the very beginning. And I think that's helped us in so many ways, so that whether it's a salesperson who's getting on a call who may be living with X or caring for someone with X, they can share those things, that they can, relate to others. Many of our editors who are working with our contributors on those stories are living, with health issues and disabilities and all these different, issues. And I think that helps them have a better relationship with the person who's writing the story. They can relate, in some way. And all of that just happens naturally and organically. But I think the key is starting with the team really being, people within the community. And I think it's particularly important in healthcare, where, we're trained to think of the experts are the people wearing the white coats and, all of that. And they're fantastic. Trust me, love doctors and other, healthcare providers. But it's also important for the people who have the lived experience to have a role in talking about this. And I think that's one of the things we've done a good job of at the Mighty, is elevating the people with lived experience. And again, whether those are employees, our army of, we've got close to 15,000 writers who publish stories now. And I think that just, it helps us be honest and authentic about, the real issues that people are facing. But yeah, I think it starts from building the right team.
Yes. Okay. Are we hearing this, you guys? We're hearing this, that the success starts with the team, the diversity of the team, the people who have the lived experience. And that's what's connecting with the people, this community at the Mighty. That's just awesome. I mean, it just seems so obvious. And yet,
it doesn't happen enough in healthcare. I think in particular in healthcare, the more that we can do this, not just the Mighty, but across the healthcare industry, I think it just closes the gap between the person who is living with a health condition and the person who is supposed to be the expert telling them what to do. When you get more people involved who have that lived experience, I think it's better for everyone.
Yes, closing the gap. And, it's not just it's a win-win type situation.
Mm-hmm.
Just one small example is reducing readmission rates, for example, at the hospital. Okay. Mm-hmm. If we close that gap.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Love it. Mike, how does the Mighty work with nonprofit organizations, patient advocates, and others to amplify your mission to empower care partners?
Yeah, I'll start with the individual patient advocates. And I think and I'd say caregiver advocates as well. And that's providing a platform where they can kind of build their own presence and be open about what they're going through. And they have a community here that wants to listen, right? Mm-hmm. And they may be experiencing their own lives, maybe friends and family, they could be very empathetic, but they may not get it. They may not really understand what someone's going through. And so to provide a platform, assistance, and whether it's writing stories or making posts or asking questions, and then having this community that's there that wants to hear this and wants to respond and all that. I think we're helping a lot of people open up about what they're going through, which has so many advantages. And then so that's more in the individuals, and then the patient advocacy organizations or nonprofits. For those, I mean, again, they often will do a great job of building out resources, but they typically don't get a large audience around those, right? So they put a lot of time and energy into something, but they're not media experts. They're not gonna, that's not what they're there to do. And so
Right.
the Mighty can help be a good partner to them to get those resources out to a whole lot more people. And so typically, so we work with hundreds of nonprofits and patient advocacy organizations, and typically the structure of those are more of a handshake deal, but it's basically, we'll bring a lot more people to you, right, to the organization, and they often see us as a great resource with the content, with the community that we have, that they'll share that with their the people that are in that, members of those organizations. And it's a great value exchange, because more people learn about the Mighty and our resource, and we get more people who want to write for us and all that when they share the Mighty with their community. And when we share their resources and all that the work that they're doing with our community, they pick up more and more people, and we help direct folks so that they can get specific help within those organizations. So it's a really good partnership where there's value on on both sides. That's typically the way that we work with those types of organizations.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this work. It's so important and making such a huge impact. I'd like to wrap up by asking you, is there anything else that is important for our audience to know? Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I would just, you've got an audience of a lot of caregivers, that are out there, and I'm certainly one of them. And I just say that, whether it's on the Mighty or anywhere else, I think when you feel like you're in a place where you can open up about what you're going through and feel comfortable asking questions, and I think it's so helpful. I think it's so being open and vulnerable, again, within the right setting with the right people, wherever that you feel comfortable. There's so much value there that I think that folks could get. And there's so many people that are out there, living in silence with all kinds of, pain and frustration and grief. And if you're able to find folks that you can open up to about that, I just highly encourage it, whether it's on the Mighty or anywhere else.
Yes, I agree. It makes such a difference to be comfortable when asking questions, to be vulnerable in that way. So thank you once again, Mike, for your work and your time today. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right, thanks so much.